1970 Newport Jazz Festival, Rhode Island. The jazz establishment and soul musicians were in the same venue, but there was an invisible wall between them. Jazz purists didn't consider funk to be serious music. And that night this tension exploded. A famous jazz trumpeter approached James Brown. The crowd went quiet. Everyone wondered what would happen. The trumpeter smiled, but it wasn't friendly. "Mr. Brown," he said loudly enough for everyone to hear, "tell me, can you actually improvise? Or do you just repeat the same groove over and over?" The festival grounds froze. This was a challenge. Public, direct. James Brown stood there in his perfectly pressed suit, his band members behind him looking uncertain. They were funk musicians. They'd built their reputation on tight arrangements, choreographed moves, and infectious rhythms. But improvisation? That was jazz territory. The trumpeter continued, his tone mocking. "Perhaps you'd like to join us on stage. Show us what you can do without your dancers and your 1-4-5 progressions." James looked at his band. What could he say? Funk and jazz had been at odds for years. Jazz musicians saw funk as simplistic, repetitive, lacking the harmonic sophistication of bebop and hard bop. Then a voice rose from the crowd. Young, male, determined. "Real music is music that makes people move, not music that proves you went to music school." Everyone turned. A 19-year-old black kid stood near the stage, trembling but resolute. He wore a worn Miles Davis t-shirt and held drumsticks in his hand. James looked at him, surprised, grateful. Who was this brave young person? The trumpeter smiled condescendingly. "Son, you clearly don't understand the difference between entertainment and art." "I understand that James Brown revolutionized rhythm," the kid replied. "That takes artistry too." James felt something shift in his chest. This stranger was defending him with more conviction than he'd defended himself. The question hung in the air. Could James Brown really improvise with jazz legends? Or would this night end in embarrassment? If you want to discover the untold stories behind music's greatest legends, please subscribe to our channel. We're revealing the moments that shaped history. Now, let me take you back several weeks before that night to understand why this challenge cut so deep and why what happened next mattered so much. Early June 1970, James Brown was at the absolute peak of his commercial success. He'd just released Get Up, I Feel Like Being a Sex Machine, which was dominating the charts. His concerts were selling out. His influence on popular music was undeniable. But within the jazz community, James faced constant criticism. To them, funk was simplistic. It repeated the same rhythmic patterns. It didn't have the harmonic complexity of jazz. It was entertainment for the masses, not art for the serious music lover. This attitude had followed James throughout his career. He'd always known about it, but by 1970, with funk music exploding in popularity and threatening jazz's cultural dominance, the criticism had become more vocal, more public, more personal. James had complicated feelings about it. He loved jazz. He'd grown up listening to Louis Armstrong, Duke Ellington, and Charlie Parker. He respected the musicianship, the technical skill, the improvisational genius. But he also knew that his music was valid, important, transformative. Funk wasn't simple. It was sophisticated in different ways. The pocket, the groove, the way rhythm and melody locked together to create something that made people move. That took skill too. That took artistry. The invitation to Newport Jazz Festival had come as a surprise. George Wine, the festival's promoter, wanted to expand the audience, bring in younger fans. He'd invited James Brown and several other soul and funk acts to perform alongside traditional jazz artists. Some jazz musicians welcomed this. Others felt it was a betrayal of the festival's mission. And one musician in particular, a trumpeter named Charles Wellington, was vocally opposed. Wellington was a legend in jazz circles. He'd played with everyone who mattered. His improvisational skills were legendary. His understanding of harmony was encyclopedic, and he had very strong opinions about what constituted real music. When he learned James Brown would be performing at Newport, Wellington told the press, "Next they'll have disco dancers at Carnegie Hall. This is a jazz festival, not a dance party." The comments made headlines. James read them and felt the sting, but he agreed to perform anyway. Not to prove Wellington wrong, but because he believed in his music and wanted to share it with a new audience. On the night of the festival, James arrived with his full band. The JBs were ready. They'd rehearsed their set meticulously. Every horn hit, every rhythm break, every moment was choreographed for maximum impact. But from the moment they arrived, they felt the judgment. Jazz musicians looked at them like they were tourists in a sacred space. Conversation stopped when James walked by. The unspoken message was clear. You don't belong here. Maceo Parker, James's saxophonist, noticed it first. They think we're sellouts, he muttered to James. They think we simplified jazz for money. James tried to stay focused. We're here to play. That's what matters. But he felt it too. The subtle dismissals. The way jazz musicians looked at his band like they were carnival acts, not serious musicians. Fred Wesley, the trombonist, felt it most acutely. He'd studied jazz, knew the tradition, respected it deeply. They don't understand that funk is its own language, he said quietly. It's not simplified jazz. It's something different. The information in this video is compiled from documented interviews, archival news, books, and historical reports. For narrative purposes, some parts are dramatized and may not represent 100% factual accuracy. We also use AI-assisted visuals and AI narration for cinematic reconstruction. The use of AI does not mean the story is fake. It is a storytelling tool. Our goal is to recreate the spirit of that era as faithfully as possible. Enjoy watching. The festival began with traditional jazz sets, a bebop quartet playing Charlie Parker, a big band performing Duke Ellington arrangements, a piano trio exploring modal jazz, all brilliant, all technically sophisticated. James and his band watched from backstage, genuinely appreciating the musicianship. They might play different music, but they recognized mastery when they heard it. During a break between sets, James and his band found themselves in the backstage area. A few jazz musicians nodded politely, but mostly they were ignored. That's when Charles Wellington approached. He walked directly to where James stood, smiled, and spoke loudly enough that everyone nearby stopped talking. Mr. Brown, I've been curious. All those hits you have, they're built on one or two chords, aren't they? I'm wondering, do you actually know how to play over changes, real harmonic movement? The question wasn't curious. It was dismissive, condescending. Maceo bristled. We know our instrument. Wellington's smile widened. Oh, I'm sure you play your arrangements very well, but can you improvise? Can you respond to unexpected harmonic movement? That's what jazz is about. James felt his jaw tighten. This man was suggesting that everything James had built, every innovation he'd created, wasn't real musicianship because it didn't follow jazz's rules. I improvise every night, James said quietly. Every show is different. Choreographed variations aren't improvisation, Wellington said. I'm talking about real spontaneous creation. Jazz, the art of the unexpected. Fred Wesley stepped forward. With respect, sir, what we do is improvisation too. The pocket isn't written down. It's felt. That takes skill. Does it though? Wellington challenged. Or is it just muscle memory? Playing the same groove repeatedly until it becomes automatic. The trumpeter looked at James directly. Tell you what, Mr. Brown, why don't you join us for the late-night jam session? We play standards, real harmonic movement. Show us what the godfather of soul can do without his choreography and his one-chord vamps. The challenge was public now. Everyone backstage was listening. James felt the weight of the moment. If he declined, it would confirm everything Wellington believed. If he accepted and failed, he'd embarrass himself and his entire genre. Before James could respond, that young voice rang out. Real music is music that makes people move, not music that proves you went to music school. Everyone turned. The kid stood near the backstage entrance, clutching his drumsticks. He looked terrified but determined. Who let this kid back here? Wellington asked, annoyed. Music isn't about complexity, the young man continued, his voice shaking. It's about impact. James Brown changed how people hear rhythm. That's artistry. Have you ever been challenged to prove yourself in an area where others judged you unfairly? Share your thoughts in the comments. Wellington frowned. Young man, I don't think you understand the technical requirements of serious music. I understand that cold sweat changed everything, the kid replied. You can't play that groove without years of practice. You can't create that pocket without understanding rhythm at the deepest level. James looked at this stranger who was defending him so passionately. What's your name, young brother? Marcus, the kid said. Marcus Johnson. I'm a jazz student at Berkeley, but I grew up on your music, Mr. Brown. It taught me everything I know about rhythm. Wellington shook his head. A jazz student defending pop music. What are they teaching you kids these days? Marcus met Wellington's eyes. They're teaching us that music is bigger than our prejudices. Fred Wesley grinned. I like this kid. Wellington turned back to James. So will you play, or does your young defender speak for you? James looked at Marcus. The kid met his eyes, and in that moment something passed between them. Encouragement, solidarity, belief. James turned to his band. I'll do it. Messio started. James, you don't have to. I'll do it, James repeated. But not alone. We're the JBs. We play together. Wellington looked uncertain now. He'd challenged James individually. He hadn't expected the entire band to respond. The jam session is for soloists, Wellington said. Then we'll all solo, James replied, his confidence growing. Each of us will show you what we can do. Then we'll play together. Show you what happens when funk musicians really lock in. The backstage area buzzed with anticipation. This had gone from a simple challenge to something much more interesting. James and his band walked toward the stage area where the late-night jam session would happen. As they passed Marcus, James stopped. Thank you, James said quietly. You didn't have to defend us. Yes, I did, Marcus replied. Your music saved my life. When I was depressed, Get Up Off of That Thing got me moving again. Literally saved me. Music is supposed to do that, James said. Not just impress other musicians. They set up for the jam session. The jam sessions at Newport were legendary. Spontaneous, unpredictable, where the best jazz musicians showed what they could really do. The stage was set with a piano, upright bass, drums, and various horns. The challenge was simple. Wellington's group would start playing a jazz standard, something with complex chord changes, and James and his band would have to keep up. A crowd gathered. Word had spread about the challenge. Young funk fans came to support James. Jazz purists came to watch him fail. Everyone else came because they sensed something important was about to happen. Wellington started with Giant Steps, one of the most harmonically complex jazz compositions ever written, John Coltrane's masterpiece, designed to push musicians to their absolute limits. The changes moved so fast that even skilled jazz musicians struggled with it. Wellington was choosing the hardest possible test. His quartet started playing. The harmonic movement was dizzying, brilliant, technically perfect. Wellington's trumpet soared over the changes, demonstrating absolute mastery. When they finished the first chorus, Wellington looked at James. Your turn. James stood there for a moment. He knew Giant Steps, knew it was considered impossible for most musicians, knew that Wellington had chosen it specifically to embarrass him. But James had something Wellington didn't expect. He'd been studying, not formally, not in a school, but he'd been listening to jazz for years, analyzing it, understanding it, respecting it. James picked up a microphone, not to sing, but to speak. I'm going to be honest, he said to the crowd. I can't play that the way Mr. Wellington just played it. That takes years of jazz training, and I respect that. Wellington's smile grew. He thought he'd won. But James continued, I can show you something else. I can show you how a funk musician hears those same changes, how we find the groove in complexity, how we make it move. James turned to his band. Fred, give me a trombone line through those changes. Simple. Just outline the harmony. Fred Wesley played a funky trombone line that followed the Giant Steps changes, but instead of racing through them, he laid back. He found the pocket. He made the complex changes groove. Now Maceo, James said. Add the alto. Find the spaces. Maceo Parker's saxophone wove through Fred's trombone line, adding syncopation, rhythmic displacement, making the harmony breathe. Clyde, give me that bass, James called to his bassist. Clyde Stubblefield played the bass line, finding the funk in Coltrane's changes. It shouldn't have worked, but it did. The complex harmony was suddenly physical, danceable, alive in a different way. James started singing over it, not lyrics, but rhythmic vocalizations. His voice became another instrument, adding layers of rhythm and melody that transformed the composition. What he was doing wasn't traditional jazz improvisation, but it was improvisation, real-time creation, spontaneous musicianship, just in funk's language instead of jazz's language. The crowd responded immediately. Heads nodded, feet tapped. The music was working its magic. When they finished, the applause was genuine. Even some jazz purists looked impressed, not because James had played jazz like Wellington, but because he'd shown that there was another way to approach the same harmonic material. Wellington stood there, his expression unreadable. Then he did something unexpected. He picked up his trumpet and started playing with James's band, following their groove, their pocket, their rhythm. It was tentative at first. Wellington was used to leading, not following the groove. But gradually he found it. His jazz trumpet lines over the funk rhythms created something neither purely jazz nor purely funk. One by one, other jazz musicians joined in. The pianist added jazz harmonies. The drummer adapted to Clyde's funk feel, while maintaining jazz sensibilities. The music became a conversation, a fusion. If this story is showing you a different side of music history, please subscribe. We're sharing the moments that changed everything. For 20 minutes they played, jazz musicians and funk musicians, finding common ground. The invisible wall between the genres dissolved because they were all speaking the same fundamental language, the language of music, the language of rhythm and harmony and melody. When they finally stopped, the crowd exploded. This wasn't just applause, it was recognition that something special had happened. A barrier had broken. James found Marcus in the crowd. The young jazz student was crying, happy tears. "You did it," Marcus said. "You showed them." "No," James replied. "We all did it. You, me, my band, even Mr. Wellington. We proved that music is bigger than any genre." Wellington approached, his face complex. Pride, respect, and maybe a bit of humility. "I owe you an apology," Wellington said stiffly. "I judged your music unfairly." "We get that a lot," Maceo said, not entirely graciously. Wellington continued. "What you played wasn't traditional jazz, but it was improvisation, real improvisation, and I was wrong to suggest otherwise." James extended his hand. "Music has many languages. We should learn from each other." They shook hands. It wasn't perfect. Wellington still believed jazz was the highest form of American music, and James still knew funk was equally important. But there was respect now, acknowledgement that different didn't mean lesser. The rest of the night transformed. Jazz musicians and funk musicians mixed, shared ideas, played together. Some jazz cats asked James about the pocket, how to find that groove. Some funk musicians asked jazz players about harmonic substitutions. Marcus approached James one more time before the night ended. "Thank you," he said, "for showing me that courage matters. I've been afraid to pursue my own sound, trying to fit into what jazz is supposed to be. But watching you tonight, I realized I can create something new." James smiled. "What kind of music do you want to make?" "I don't know yet," Marcus admitted. "Maybe something that combines jazz harmony with funk rhythm. Is that even possible?" "Everything's possible," James said. "That's what tonight proved. Don't let anyone tell you your music isn't valid. If it comes from your heart and it moves people, it's real." Marcus kept that advice. He finished at Berkeley, started his own band, created music that combined jazz sophistication with funk's infectious rhythms. He never became famous, but he had a successful career, recorded several albums, influenced other musicians. And whenever he felt discouraged, he remembered that night at Newport, remembered James Brown standing up to the jazz establishment, not by abandoning his own musical language, but by demonstrating its validity. James and his band left Newport that night, having won more than a confrontation. They'd built a bridge between genres, changed minds, and inspired a young musician to believe in his own voice. For James, the experience reinforced something he'd always believed. Music wasn't about proving superiority. It was about communication, connection, making people feel something real. Years later, in interviews, James talked about that night. "The jazz cats thought funk was simple," he'd say. "But finding the pocket, locking in that groove, making complex rhythm feel natural, that's as hard as any bebop solo. Different skills, same level of artistry." Wellington, the trumpeter who'd issued the challenge, also spoke about it in later years. "I was arrogant," he admitted in a jazz magazine interview. "I believed jazz was the only serious American music. James Brown taught me differently. He showed me that sophistication comes in many forms. The pocket is as complex as any chord progression. I just couldn't hear it until that night." He paused, then added, "There was a young man who defended James that night, a kid named Marcus. I've thought about his words many times. Real music makes people move." He was right. I'd forgotten that music is meant to be felt, not just intellectually appreciated. Marcus, now a music educator in his 70s, still tells the story to his students. "James Brown didn't need to prove he could play jazz," Marcus says. "He'd already proven he could create music that changed the world. But he took that challenge seriously because he understood something important. Respect isn't demanded, it's earned through artistry, and the courage to be authentically yourself. The night at Newport became legendary in music circles. It marked a turning point in how different genres viewed each other. Music schools started teaching funk with the same seriousness they taught jazz. Jazz musicians started incorporating funk rhythms. Funk musicians started exploring jazz harmonies. James Brown had helped spark that evolution, not by arguing for it, but by demonstrating it, by showing that a one-chord vamp executed with absolute precision and feeling was just as valid as a complex bebop solo. Every time James performed after that night, he carried the lesson with him. Music was about connection, about making people feel, about finding that groove that made bodies move and spirits soar. Whether playing to funk fans or jazz critics, the goal was the same: create something real, something true, something that spoke to the human need for rhythm and melody. And Marcus never forgot. He passed that lesson to hundreds of students over his teaching career. Don't let anyone tell you your music isn't valid, he tells them all. If it comes from honesty and moves people, it's real music. James Brown taught me that, and he learned it not by changing his music to fit someone else's standards, but by being so completely authentically himself that others had no choice but to respect it. The Beatles taught their generation one version of that lesson. James Brown taught another. The specifics were different, but the core truth was the same. Real music, real art, real excellence comes not from fitting into someone else's definition of validity, but from having the courage to define your own terms, to believe in your own voice, and to create something so genuine that it transcends all the artificial walls we build around different genres and styles. That's the legacy. That's the lesson. That's why this story still matters. Not because James Brown proved he could play jazz, but because he proved that funk was its own language, equally valid, equally sophisticated, equally capable of moving hearts and minds. Music is universal, and everyone who approaches it with honesty and passion has a place at the table. That 19-year-old kid understood it. James Brown demonstrated it, and the music world, slowly, gradually, began to embrace it. If this incredible story inspired you, make sure to subscribe and hit that thumbs up button. Share this video with someone who needs to hear about the power of staying true to your own voice. Have you ever had to defend something you believed in against people who didn't understand it? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to ring that notification bell for more amazing true stories about the heart behind music's greatest legends.